If you're a fanatic for the unknown, unfamiliar, and enjoy creepy tales in story format, then this channel's for you. We upload 1 to 2 times weekly, so for more content just like this, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom. Now on with our story. Today's story takes place in the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina in an old mill house built in 1917. Over the years, there have been very few owners, but several people have passed away in the house. For it to be an old house, it was still in pretty good shape, but it did need some renovations. Lynn, who is one of the main characters in the story, her parents bought the home in the early 90s and started work on it as soon as they moved in. This is when little things they didn't really pay attention to started happening. Then other things started to happen that were more noticeable and not very easily explained. There was never anything too scary, just little things like kitchen drawers would open on their own, strange noises and voices would be heard late at night. They would feel like someone was watching, but no one was there. And the kids always talked about seeing a man, and they all described him the same. Tall, lanky, wearing overalls and a hat. There was also a young slender woman with dark hair who was seen and heard upstairs quite frequently. This made the adults think something paranormal might be going on in the house, but it wasn't anything malicious or too frightening, so they carried on with their normal everyday lives just like you and I, and they very seldom even talked about it. When the renovations were done, things seemed to calm down, but they began to notice that any time they started any kind of project that involved change, this is when things would start up again. Soon after Lynn's parents passed, she moved in the house. Lynn was also recently widowed and had never lived alone before, so she didn't feel comfortable living in this great big house all by herself, especially knowing all the strange stories and things that had happened in the house over the years. Scott, her son, who was now in his early 20s, had just moved back from Kentucky and agreed to move in with her. This was perfect. He needed a place to stay, the house was huge, and he could also help with the upkeep of the property. This gives you a little background of the house, so let's jump forward to present day and get right into our story. Lynn decided to update the kitchen to get it a little more modernized. She wanted to paint the walls and the kitchen cabinets, replace the floor, and buy some new appliances. It had been a long day, so Scott and Lynn decided they were going to stop for the day and watch some TV together in the family room. Like always, Lynn fell asleep pretty quick. Scott watched several movies, then started to doze off at around 10 or so. Around 3 a.m., both of them woke up to knocking on the window behind Scott, who was lying on the couch. The knock was loud enough to wake both of them up from a sound sleep. Groggy and still half asleep, Lynn asked Scott if he heard knocking, but before he could answer, there was another knock on the wall beside the TV. This time they were both awake and knew they heard the knocks. Scott jumped up to turn on the lights, but before he could, another knock started on the staircase beside the recliner where Lynn was sitting. The knocks were moving around the room, and they both just stood there looking confused and trying to figure out what was going on. Scott carefully lifted one of the blinds to look out to see if maybe someone was outside, but there was no one there. Now just imagine how terrifying it would be if you heard knocking but no one was there, or at least no one you could see with your eyes. Lynn and Scott had to be scared out of their mind. Scott immediately started trying to rationalize the situation and questioned whether or not it could be air in the water lines. Lynn, knowing where all the plumbing was, quickly dismissed air in the pipes. The bathroom, where the water lines were, was to the left of the room, and the knocks were coming from the middle of the room and from the far right. Remember, the first knock was coming from the window, the second knock was coming from the wall behind the TV, and the third knock was coming from the staircase. They both just stood there frozen, looking around the room, wondering if they were going crazy. Were they really hearing knocking, or was this just their imagination playing tricks? Lynn, knowing all the strange things that had happened in the past, Wondered if perhaps it could be the ghost since they were doing some renovations. Then all of a sudden, knocking started in the dining room. They both ran through the kitchen, turning on the lights, and as they turned the corner into the dining room, there were 3 pounding knocks on the floor, like someone was mad and stomping their foot. They both jumped back at the same time, and I'm sure they're both pretty frantic and terrified by now. There wasn't anyone in the room. Scott's mind is racing as he's trying to come up with an explanation of what's going on. I would guess they're not only scared, but probably pretty frustrated by now. A faint knock coming from the kitchen now has their attention. The knock was so quiet it could only be heard if you were listening for it. Now I know if it were me, I would be quite shaken and ready to get out of there, but Lynn realized something very important. It wasn't just knocking. Every single knock they had heard were 3 knocks. As soon as Lynn realized this, there were 3 more knocks on one of the kitchen cabinets. Just as they both turned to look, 3 more knocks came from behind the refrigerator. But these knocks were really slow, like... They were both just standing there as if they were waiting for more knocks. Then, 3 more knocks came from the kitchen doorway leading out to the back entrance. Lynn told Scott something was leading them to the back door and not to open the door. Scott told his mom this was ridiculous. It had to be something outside, and he was going out to see what was going on. He grabbed his shotgun, and right as Scott reached to grab the doorknob, 3 gentle knocks struck the door. These knocks were gentle, as if someone they knew was standing outside the door, knocking to come in. Scott turned to look at his mom and shook his head. She told him again not to open the door. Something was trying to get in, and whatever it was not good. After a few seconds, 3 more knocks hit the door, a little more firmly this time. They both stood there in silence, just looking at the door, like they were waiting for whatever it was to knock it down and walk through. Scott had enough and yelled,
"We're calling the police!"
As soon as he said this, 3 more knocks slammed the door, so hard the door shook. These were angry knocks, like they were daring Scott to call the police. Lynn grabbed Scott's arm and pulled him back into the kitchen. She started whispering like she was scared whatever it was would hear her. She told Scott she didn't think they should open the door because whatever it was may be trying to get inside. She thought if they did open the door, they would be inviting whatever this thing was inside the home. Lynn knew whatever was going on wasn't right, and she had a bad feeling. Whatever this thing was evil. Lynn told Scott they needed to pray. Scott was still a little skeptical, but he couldn't explain what was going on. And his mom had made it clear they were not opening the door, so they couldn't call the police or go outside to investigate, so he finally agreed. When they finished their prayer, everything seemed calm and relaxed. They sat at the kitchen table without even speaking to each other for about an hour. There hadn't been any more knocks, so they both decided to try to get some sleep. The next morning, Lynn went through turning off all the lights they had left on the night before. Scott finally got up and came in the kitchen to get coffee. They both sat down at the kitchen table talking about what had happened the night before. They were both just trying to rationalize and explain it away. But it was a new day with no more knocks, so they both agreed they should just get on with their day and try not to think about it. Scott just couldn't shake it. He needed to know what was going on and why. He went back to his room and started looking for any information he could find on the internet about 3 knocks. When he searched 3 knocks, the first thing that pulled up said that things done in threes was thought to mock the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now this was really alarming to Scott because he realized his mom may be right. Something evil may have been trying to get inside. He wanted to make sure and needed more clarity, so he continued his search. He came across an article talking about banshees. Now, a banshee is a spirit in Irish myths who warns of death by giving a death call or a death scream, but there have also been reports and claims of banshees knocking on doors and windows. Now, this raised more questions than provided answers for Scott, but one thing's for sure, something did happen, and Scott was now more concerned than ever of what it all meant. Lynn and Scott got dressed for work and went on with their day as if nothing happened. They both agreed it would be best not to say anything to anyone about what happened until they knew more. Lynn arrived at work, and even though most of the day was uneventful, she just couldn't get it off her mind and felt like a black cloud was hanging over her head. She managed through her day, and it was finally time to leave, so she headed out to her car. On the drive home, Lynn rode in silence. She was just lost in her thoughts, thinking about everything that had happened the night before. And then out of nowhere, she heard 3 knocks coming from the back window. It was so sudden she lost control of the car and began to swerve. Luckily, she regained control and pulled off on the side of the road. As she started to open the door, there were 3 faint knocks on the passenger side window. Lynn needed some air, but she wasn't sure about opening the door. She wondered if she did open the door, would it get inside the car? Right then, she heard and felt raspy breathing on her neck. So without even thinking, she flung the door open and jumped out. Now, Lynn was so scared she couldn't breathe. She was having a panic attack. She was gasping for air, so she sat down, put her head between her knees, and finally calmed herself down. She was beginning to get up when the horn blew, and yes, it blew 3 times. Now Lynn's fear turned to anger. She turned and started screaming at the car, "What do you want? Leave us alone! Get out!" Then someone from behind yelled, "Are you okay?" She turned and seen several cars parked on the side of the road with people just staring at her. Without even thinking, she jumped in the car and went straight home. Nothing made any sense. Lynn didn't understand what was happening or why it was happening. Once she got home, she was afraid to go inside, in fear it would follow her into the house. She just stood on the porch, pacing back and forth until Scott got home. Once inside, Lynn told Scott everything that had happened on the drive home. Now, this angered Scott, and he started challenging whatever this was. In an angry voice, he yelled out,
"Leave my mom alone. If you want to mess with someone, mess with me."
Lynn had some hot tea and finally calmed down. She started fixing dinner, and Scott went to take a shower. A few minutes after getting into the shower, Scott heard 3 knocks on the bathroom window. Scott was on instant alert. He pulled back the shower curtain, looking around the room, when he heard 3 more knocks coming from the bathroom mirror. Scott just stood there paralyzed, just staring at the mirror. He realized it wasn't a good idea to challenge this thing, because now it's made itself known. It's inside the house. He knew by the 3 imprints left in the misty mirror this thing was definitely not human. The room turned ice cold, and Scott felt like something was watching him. He knew this wasn't the man he'd seen as a child. This was definitely something evil. Not wanting to worry his mother, Scott didn't tell Lynn what had happened. After dinner, Scott told his mom he was going to bed, and they both said goodnight. There was no way Scott would be able to sleep. He had to figure out what was going on, and if this thing was trying to hurt his mom, he had to figure out how to stop it. He went to his computer and started doing more research. And again, just like before, no answers, just more questions. Scott was angry and frustrated, but he finally drifted off to sleep. At exactly 3:33 a.m., his cell rang. As soon as Scott answered, he heard a loud screech and what sounded like a woman's scream. This is when Scott started to think he may actually be dealing with a banshee. Not being able to go back to sleep, he read everything he could find about banshees. He found some articles saying banshees were harmless and simply a folklore, but he found some articles that really shook him to his core. What he found really made him worry about his mom, and he wondered if this was some kind of omen. Was something going to happen to Lynn? Around 6 a.m., Lynn and Scott had coffee and got dressed for work. The rest of that day and the next was very uneventful. Everything seemed normal, no more knocks or strange activity. Lynn was a little more relaxed and thought whatever was going on was now over. The whole thing started 3 days ago, so Lynn really hoped this was the end. Lynn was driving home from work in a good mood, singing along with the radio and bouncing her head to the beat, when all of a sudden the radio had a lot of static coming through. Then loud screeching started coming through. The radio just started flipping stations on its own. The volume would shoot up real loud, and then down real low, and then up real loud, and down real low. Then in the middle of all this, her cell phone started ringing. When she said hello, 3 loud screams came across the Bluetooth and echoed throughout the car. Lynn started screaming and just threw her phone in the floorboard. With tears streaming down her face, she drove straight home. She finally got home, jumped out of the car, and ran to the door. She was shaking so much, it took several minutes to get the key into the lock to open the door. As soon as she got inside, she slammed it and just stood there with her back against the door like she was trying to prevent something from getting inside. For several minutes, Lynn just stood there crying. She finally went to the kitchen, made her some tea, and calmed down. It was getting late, so she went ahead and started dinner. When she finished, Scott still wasn't home, so she decided to watch the news and lay down on the couch. Even though she was still on edge and jumped at every little noise, somehow she managed to fall asleep. When she woke up, it was dark. She looked at her watch and realized how late it was. She yelled for Scott, but he didn't answer. She ran to his room, but he wasn't in his room. She then heard a loud noise outside and thought maybe it was him, so she ran to the door. When she opened the door, she was paralyzed in fear. She dropped to her knees as tears began to swell in her eyes. She started shaking her head no. The police officer who was standing at the door said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, there's been an accident." Lynn started screaming, "No, no, not my Scott." Then the wind started to howl as a crack of thunder shook the ground. Then 3 distinct screams echoed through the mountains. Lynn now knew what all of this meant. It was a warning. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Otherwise, you may hear 3 knocks at your door.